Hello, everyone. Welcome to Our Voices, the podcast for straight partners and partners of trans people by Our Path. I'm your host, Kristin Kelbley. Over the last 7 seasons, some of you have asked when I would tell my story on the Our Voices podcast. I went back and forth about whether I would tell my story one day because I couldn't figure out the best way to do it. I didn't want to sit here in front of a microphone and rattle off the blow by blow. That seemed like it would be torture for both you and me. Then an idea came to me. Why not interview one of my dearest and best friends who had a front row seat to the carnage and the divorce, a woman who's been my friend and in my life for 25 years now, literally half my life. Our guest today is, I am proud and privileged to say, Angela Tonn, my dear friend. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled, really.
We've been talking about this conversation for a while now, so I'm glad we're finally here doing this because I think getting your perspective, because you had a front row seat to my story,
Daddy, did I?
it's a lot more interesting than me just sitting here, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to kind of tag team this today and share bits of the story, but I want to give our listeners a little bit of background on you and who you are. We met in Atlanta when I moved there with my ex-husband in I think the year 2000, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere around in
2000,
there.
yes.
Yeah. And we met, how do we first meet?
You auditioned for a show I was hired to direct.
Right.
And I wanted to cast you, and the producer said no, because she wanted that part. So I got to cast you in a different part.
Right. But at least we got to work together, right?
We did. Yeah.
The story of the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Absolutely. So yeah, we worked on a couple of shows that season and then several more over the years, and along the way became personal friends as well.
Right. And as a little background for our listeners, you're a lesbian, aren't you?
Yes. The real kind.
The real kind. Exactly. And I have to say for our listeners, because every other time that we've interviewed a lesbian on this podcast, it's always been a lesbian who's been in a mixed orientation marriage. You never married a man, did you?
No, that sounds horrifying. No, jokes aside, no, yes. I always knew, not when you're a little kid, but when you get older and realize that you don't have crushes on little boys like all the girls do, or what was being talked about. So the idea of spending the rest of my life pretending just seemed daunting. Like I am going, if I had wanted to go down that road, that would mean not only lying to that poor guy, but also lying to everybody. And like being in a play 24/7 seems exhausting. So it just never felt like any kind of an option,
Right. And I want to say, because this is one of the reasons I've always been grateful for you and admired you, is because we're not talking about 10, 15, 20, even 30 years ago.
No.
We're getting a little older now. I'm the tail end of Gen X. You're the front end of Gen X. You were
older Gen X here.
Yeah. Which means you were out at 16, I think, in the 80s. Yeah. Like, what was that like? I just have to ask.
The 80s. Yeah. That would be the early 80s, right? Mm-hmm. It was strange. I was lucky. Really lucky. My parents were not. I mean, I'm going to guess they had figured it out, right? Mm-hmm, that something was up here. Mm-hmm. But when my hand was forced and I told them, they weren't upset. Didn't kick me out. Didn't. The only thing my mother said was, "Well, this is your life will be harder, and I'm sorry for that." Mm-hmm. Other than that, we just sailed right along.
Yeah. I mean, I had the privilege of knowing your parents, Dick and Helen, and
they adored you.
I loved them too. And I just am always astounded by how they responded at the time, a child born in the 60s, and they were so enlightened around it.
I say this delicately because I certainly don't want to offend anyone, but I think some of it may have been a lack of religion in my family.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They weren't, I don't think they would have described themselves particularly as atheist or anything, but they just, we didn't go to church. I
Right.
was never christened or anything. And I think with that lack of feeling like, oh, my child is going to hell, I think that allowed them maybe to be freer and assess it differently. Anyway, it's what I've always attributed some, because, my parents were just very normal people. They weren't
Cleveland,
highly
right?
educated.
Your dad came from Cleveland.
Oh, right. Cleveland, blue collar Cleveland.
Wasn't exactly the Castro in San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't, no one went to an Ivy League.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, you maybe would think of family with really high levels of educational attainment or very worldly,
right.
And we weren't any of that. So that I've always kind of chalked it up to not having particularly the Southern brand of religion, Christianity, in your ear.
Yeah.
Telling you that certain things are just
an abomination. Yeah.
Yeah.
And many of our listeners will understand that, because the reason they're listening to this podcast is because they grew up in an environment like that, or their spouses grew up in an environment like that. And no judgment on belief or religion, but those kinds of cultural containers often create mixed orientation marriages. They just do, no matter what the religious belief set is.
Absolutely.
And I want to ask you, sort of one other thing about your upbringing, because I know we're here, we're going to shift the lens in a minute, but because I've always admired you for this, you were out during a time of the AIDS crisis. You saw it all.
Oh, absolutely. I was a young woman, but yeah, that was my introduction to the gay community. Was during that time. Silence equals death, and back when gay pride was not the bizarre carnival it's turned into.
Carnival.
Yes. But it was a protest march. We marched to the Capitol and died in on the steps as a way to say, attention needs to be paid to this disease, to our brothers who are dying. So yeah, absolutely. It was a heck of a time to be a young person, and it didn't affect women, of course, nearly as it affected the fellas. But, fortunately we had in the lesbian community at the time, the elders who, well, basically we were instructed to step up. Like, I don't know if your listeners or anyone is old enough to remember, but, at the time, people were afraid to be in the room with these guys. It was so dangerous and scary. It was earth-shaking when Princess Diana shook hands with an AIDS patient, and it, and made the papers, and because there was this fear, just misinformation, disinformation, and fear. And so we were called to step up, and using the fact that we have information, you're not going to get this disease by bringing these guys lunch. You're not going to get AIDS by doing caregiving for them. Mm-hmm. So to this day, I can shave a man's face better than most men.
That image, just as a young woman giving care to your brothers dying in hospitals, that's one of the reasons why you're just such a rock star to me as a human being. That story always just gets me in the feels. So I wanted our listeners to know that little bit about you. But another reason why you're here today is because you have always, not only have you been so supportive of me and my experience of mixed orientation marriage, and what that was like, because you were there and had a front row seat, and you also got wet in that storm.
Oh.
Yeah. Which we will talk about, because holy cow, the drama. But you almost have a similar situation in reverse, which I know our audience will appreciate, because you had a partner at the time that we were friends, and my ex-husband.
The Gleason foursome.
We were my ex-husband, your partner at the time, myself, and you. We had style. And
absolutely,
we had the Gleason foursome. We ran around Atlanta, and we had a lot of fun. And that partner, who will not be named in this podcast, is no longer in the picture, is she?
No. I came home one day to a note on the counter. We'd been together, we'd known each other, gosh, at least 15 years, and been together 10 years as a couple. And wow, yeah.
You came home to a note on the counter and she bounced with some money and then turned up later married to a guy. You had a similar, very disorienting experience of who was this person I was even married to.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And no idea. Again, we weren't bickering, we weren't fighting, we weren't. As far as I knew, everything was peachy keen. And yeah, she cleaned out a few bank accounts and bounced.
Yeah, unbounced and then turned up several states away with a husband.
Right.
So you've had, and I said married before, and I meant your partner.
Right.
I'm so used
At
to
the
saying
time,
married. Yeah.
Marriage was not legal.
Right. But so I just want the audience to understand that, from our perspective, because you've had you've had the mindfuck experience as well, where it's like, do I even know who this person was who I was with for this many years, who lived under my roof, who I supported financially? You've had that experience. Yeah.
Talk about a mindfuck when you're like, who are you? I know a lot of relationships dissolve, but what is that old saying? Some people are in your life for a season or whatever. And okay, fine. But when things happen in such a way that you're truly left wondering, pardon my language, who the fuck was that? Who are you? And, spending years coming to the realization that I'll never know.
Right.
And
that she was playing a role.
Yeah. She was a better actress than I thought.
Yeah. And she was a good actress. She really, we knew her from theater too. She was really good. So I just thank you for, indulging me on just giving a little bit of that background, because I want the audience to know that you actually really get it because you've lived the reverse situation. Okay, it's time for what we've always been planning. Obviously, the audience is going to know that my ex-husband was gay, and we'll jump into a little bit of how that came to be. But I'm never the one interviewed on this show, so I've done a couple of other podcasts before where I've been interviewed. But all right, we'll stumble through.
Let's do it. So let's bounce it to the beginning. How did you meet him? How did you meet your ex-husband?
Well, I laugh now. We met in theater in high school. And that's part of the problem too, is because I didn't want to stereotype. Like, I'm trying to be an enlightened 17-year-old in 1992, right? Or 18-year-old in 1992. I'm trying not to put this guy into a box, right? But he was the rehearsal pianist for a high school musical I was in. He went to the all-boys Catholic school. I went to the all-girls Catholic school. And I was in the company, and he was the rehearsal pianist. And I looked down and I saw him and I went, oh, he's cute. And a crush is born. And nothing really happened because he had this very aloof quality about him, which now I see very differently, right? But it was, at the time, it had a magnetism to it. And he would sit out the back with the crew guys chain smoking, right? And I would be in the dressing room with all the gay boys singing ABBA. So that was the first, okay, he's out with the straight guys on the loading dock smoking cigarettes, right? He's not in the dressing room with the gay guys singing Dancing Queen. So I thought I was safe.
Right. Clearly a straight man.
Clearly a straight man. But and he was a musician, he was not a stage performer. So, but we didn't start. That was when I was 17 when I met him. We did not start dating until I was 19. I was my first year of college. He was at one college in Ohio. I was at another. And then eventually I transferred, and we were at the same college. I didn't actually transfer because of him. I transferred because of the program. But our dating life was really fraught. There was aspects to it that were always uncomfortable, like never quite right. And Him having been my first boyfriend ever, and I was tall. I was always bigger than my friends, and I always felt like I towered over everybody, all the guys and all the girls. You know what I'm talking about.
So
6
there's something
feet.
you and I share.
Yeah.
We're both very tall women.
We're both
so,
robust women.
Yes.
And so I didn't have a sense of myself as someone who would have a lot of suitors, if I may use a really antiquated word.
I love that word. You didn't feel you were going to have many gentlemen callers.
I did not.
Which is, I don't know if your listeners have ever seen you or seen a picture of you. Friends, Kristin's beautiful. It's surprising to me to hear you say, that you felt like you wouldn't attract many men or whatever, because that's not my experience of seeing you.
Well, I will grapple with myself later about whether to leave that in the edit. And for now, I will take the compliments. It's beautiful for you to say such. We'll maybe talk about a little bit about my childhood, but that fed into this idea that I didn't feel like I had a lot of opportunities or was going to have a lot of opportunities. So when he came along, even though our relationship was really fraught in many ways and something was not quite right and something was a little bit off and uncomfortable, I went with it because I did really like him. And as we went to college and graduated toward college, we were engaged when I was 21. And we would have, when we started having sex, and this will be actually, it's a good time to mention for our listeners, there will be a lot of discussion of sex in this episode because that's such an integral part of my story. And so be mindful who's in the car with you. If there are, kiddos or what have you, you may want to pause and come back later. But when we started having sex in college, it was just fraught right away. And there was just an infrequency, and I was puzzled and sort of worried about it. And there were certain things that, actually, once we got engaged, very oddly, I won't go into specifics here, but there were certain things that immediately, like, he cut off. Okay, we're not doing that anymore, literally like a light switch. And the menu of things that we would do got narrower and narrower. And I kind of told myself, well, after we got engaged, I told myself it'll be better after we're married. And then, fast forward, because we'll get through this exposition pretty quick, fast forward to a year into our marriage. So we were on the cusp of moving to Atlanta from Ohio. And I woke up after a year of furious nesting and was like, oh my gosh, we only had sex like 8 times. And I ended up again, I want to say to people, he was my first boyfriend, my first anything. So I had nothing to compare. And I was a Midwestern Catholic, although I wasn't really that Catholic, didn't go to church. And so I didn't have anything to compare it to. And I was just confused and lost. And I didn't want to pressure him. And I didn't want to be that sort of, I hate the word nagging, but I didn't want to be that nagging wife. But after a year, I was like, I can't ignore this anymore. And I still remember that conversation. And I was like, what is going on? And that was the first of so many conversations like that. And he would either shut down and go completely silent, or he would be angry at me. And often we would have that version of that conversation, oftentimes like on a road trip somewhere. And I'd be like, this is perfect. We're in the car together and we can have long, thorough, wonderful, in-depth, get to know each other conversations about what we want to do in bed, right? I had this whole, like, this will be our bonding time and we can get spicy.
Sounds wonderful. Right?
Sounds great. Please, more of it.
Right. I'm all about that.
I'm all about that. He was not all about that. He would get really mad. I remember one time he turned to me and he was like, you trap me in the car and then you bring this up and I can't escape. And I was just like, wow. I'm not trapping you in the car. This is the perfect time for us to discover fantasies and things like that.
I've chained you into the dungeon.
Yeah, exactly. I've kidnapped him and chained him to a wall in the dungeon, and I'm torturing him by asking him questions about what he fantasizes about.
Right. How dare you?
How dare I? But in retrospect, knowing what we know, of course he was angry. Of course he was either shut down or belligerent or whatever version. And I think at one point towards the end, he did get a little bit like, I'm sorry, I'll try to do better. And in 1992, 93, as a high school junior, senior, freshman, sophomore, junior in college, when we got engaged, it didn't occur to me, first of all, that someone would still be in the closet. And I realize that's very naive, because obviously people still are. And obviously we understand the societal and cultural reasons that contribute to that. But where in our bubble where we were, yes, it was Catholic school, but it was a Jesuit Catholic school. And which, if people don't really know, Jesuits are generally more progressive and enlightened than all the other orders of Catholic. And our theater director was in an open relationship, not open in the, like, she was openly lesbian with our choir director. And it was just so not a thing. And our theater buddies were coming out junior, senior year, freshman year of college. So it didn't occur to me that if you were gay, you weren't part of that cohort coming out at the time. And it also didn't occur to me that even if you weren't coming out, if you were gay, why would you marry a woman? Like, ew, like it just wasn't on my radar to be looking out for that. Just like you said, I didn't marry a man because ew, right?
Ew, right. No, thank you. Ew.
Yeah.
But full disclosure, I couldn't understand it either. You know, in the knowing of you all, and as you said, getting wet in that storm, looking back, it never. I think I pushed back on you a little bit when you first started broaching that maybe this is the case. And I was like, that just doesn't, I don't get it. Your best friends are a lesbian couple. We spend crazy amounts of time together. Why would something didn't compute?
Right. He obviously is, if he's couples friends with a lesbian couple, there should be no problem here.
Right. Internalized homophobia.
Yeah. It's real.
It's real, clearly. And I think somewhere along the line, correct me if I'm wrong here, but didn't he say he just didn't want to be gay?
Yeah. And this is great, because this is one of the key moments that are burned in my brain. We were in college. We were, I think, engaged. His roommate in college was gay. And he told me at one moment that when his roommate had come out to him, he went into the bathroom and vomited. And I remember staring at him and going, why did you, I'm going to call the roommate Matthew, so what? Why did you vomit just because Matthew's gay? And he literally said, I thought that might mean that I was gay. And I was so shocked and puzzled by this, that it actually seared in my head, right, this conversation. And I was like, that made no sense to me. What does Matthew being gay have anything to do with whether or not you're gay? I mean, if you're not down with gay people, you might go and vomit in the room. But we've been around gay people. We're in theater in college. We're in theater in high school. We were in theater. Like, come on. And I said, so are you gay? And he goes, no, I figured out that's not what I want. And at the time, I'm 19. I'm 20 years old. I didn't have that I figured out that's not what I want. Now I'd ask the follow-up question. Like, okay, that's not what I asked you.
Right. Is this some sort of choice you're experiencing? Because
that's not.
Hold up here.
Hold up here. So that did not come back to me until after the divorce, and we'll get to that later. Mm-hmm. But that was one of the conversations at the time. And as a young woman, I just went, well, my boyfriend told me he's not gay. He's not gay. Like, I just, right. I believe him. He said no. Little weird how he answered it, but he said no. Mm-hmm. So, and also he wouldn't be with me if he were, because people don't do that.
Right.
So
surprise.
And now we know that that's not true. So yeah, we got married, and it didn't get better. We had a lot of things in common that we loved to do. We We gardened together. We went to.
I remember you had a beautiful rose garden.
We had a beautiful rose garden in my 20s. It was just stunning. And we would go on adventures to go find sort of rare varietals of tea roses and things like antique roses and things like that. I mean, I was really digging into the domestic life. And we were rehabbing. Well, rehabbing is a little strong word. It was, but we were redecorating, I guess you could say, a 1920s bungalow in Atlanta. And we had a lot of things that we did together. And in my estimation, yes, there were these frustrations, but we walked our little preppy dogs after work every night together. And we had our two best friends who we went to go all around town, great restaurants and bars. I was doing theater. So it felt like we had a life that broadly felt fun and vibrant and we liked. And then there was this thing about our relationship that was in the closet. We were in such a place that the way we had sex, when we did have sex, was very damaging. You had to.
We'll never forget when you revealed that.
Yeah. And I'm not going to reveal that here, but if a book ever comes out, it'll definitely be in there.
I know you wrote it down.
Yeah, I wrote it down. It'll be in there.
Maybe I can add, just for your listeners, it was very damaging.
Yeah.
Dang, it was damaging to hear about.
Yeah. And I'm sorry for that. Yeah.
No, but this is, I guess.
It's crazy.
Yes.
Right.
And, that he required a very, very weird setup to even approach his beautiful wife. And that was the most epic, honey, that's not normal.
Right. And that's an understatement for that one. Yeah.
And I know, I feel like we're sort of teasing your listeners, and I don't mean to, but it was a little ritual that he insisted upon that was.
Well, I can't entirely lay that at his feet, because I have to be honest, because I was banging my head against a wall to try to figure out a way for us to have sex to keep us having sex. And I actually went to him and I was like, well, okay, what if we do this? And this is how twisted it was. At the time, I was like, well, this could work. And I was the one who said, let's do this. And by the time it all fell apart, he was saying, well, she had to do this weird sex ritual thing. And I was like, I was doing anything I could creatively to keep us having sex, because in my mind, if we're not having sex, we're not having a marriage. And so I got to figure something out. And if that's what I have to do for you to be able to have sex with me, then that's what we have to do. And then it just got twisted. Like I was somehow damaged because I needed this very weird sex ritual in order to be able to have sex with him. So I think it's, I do have a book, and one day it may come out, and I do think it's revelatory. It took me a long time to decide if I wanted to write about that. And I think it's important to know what it's like to have sex with someone who is disgusted with you at the same time that they are having sex with you, is revolted by you at the same time they're having sex with you.
Things that, like, you asked why I never married a man. There you have it.
You didn't want to do that to either of you.
No.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and that's what, and I'll say this, and then we'll kind of move on to the next chapter. But I didn't talk to anybody about it because I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell a single soul that my sex life with my husband was so desperately painful, because I was ashamed, and because I was embarrassed, and because with nothing else to compare it to, I didn't have a reference point. I didn't understand how badly it was actually making me feel, because all that stuff, it's, the frog boiled 1 degree at a time.
Right.
That metaphor exists for a reason.
Right.
So by the time the wheels all came apart and everything came tumbling out at once, it reached a crisis point, which we will definitely talk about.
It's just on that note, the case of the woman in France whose husband was just unspeakable. And I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but there was a quote from her that it's time for shame to change sides.
Oh,
and
damn.
I know, right?
Mm.
You just said you felt shame when you had I get it. But why? Why do we women always feel the shame of things that we didn't do?
Right. Yeah.
The nail I want to hammer. Women, tell your stories.
Right. Talk to your friends.
Talk to your friends, because I didn't know when we were friends and all hanging out that, what was going on with you, with what was going on in your marriage. He seemed honestly just, sort of what's the overused phrase, right? He seemed like a nice guy, a little nebbish, but a nice guy, and had no idea the things you would, reveal later. And, the things I think we're going to talk about here.
Yeah. Right.
That I know no one wants to be that person, right? All I do is get together with my girlfriends and bitch about my partner or spouse,
right,
or whatever. No one wants to be that person. But at the same time, if we tell our stories and get that feedback that, honey, that's not normal. That's not just, what is it, like, two people who just aren't on the same wavelength, or two people who just aren't well suited to each other. You're a night owl and he's a morning guy, or, you like to go camping and he'd rather die than go to the woods. That's just a mix match of people. But when you start telling stories of things that happened or things that they did, and you have somebody who could look at you and say, honey, that's not normal.
The problems in our marriage, I never told a soul. And that's what we're talking about here, is that you had no opportunity to really shake me awake because I wasn't speaking about it.
Right.
And
I'm not trying to blame or make you feel bad at all, but I guess I'm hoping maybe listeners and other friends will take the lesson that please have some trusted people. And when something feels weird, tell your story.
Yeah, I also didn't tell anyone at all because I had a respect for the privacy of our marriage, and because I didn't want to damage him in other people's eyes. And also because if someone, you or my family or someone else, reflected back to me that this was not normal, then I'd have to deal with it. And I have to be honest and say that some part of me was not ready to deal with what that would mean if you told me that this was not normal, or someone else told me that this was not normal, because then it would have been so big and overwhelming to contemplate what that would have meant to me at the time. Now I know it meant you got to get a divorce. But that was so outside of the scope of what I could fathom at the time that I couldn't put myself in a position where someone else would have to reflect back to me just how aberrant this was.
I think on some level you knew.
I knew. Yeah.
You knew.
And I wasn't ready to face head on. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I completely understand what you're saying, and I see that. I see you didn't want to out him, so to speak, as
well said.
Anytime. We got jokes here.
Well, let's bring you in at this little point before we kind of talk about how things finally went pear-shaped. You had experiences of him. You saw things that in our relationship, like things would be going along and we'd be doing something fun, and then something really weird would happen.
Really, really weird. Do you remember the trip to Lakewood Antique Fair?
I definitely do.
for those needing some context, it's a big antique fair about once a month here in Atlanta. And all four of us enjoyed antiques. You guys were looking at more Victorian and Art Nouveau, and I'm a dedicated mid-century modernist.
Yes, you are.
So we were antiquing, and it was wonderful. One of the weirdest things I've ever seen with my own eyes happened that day. This is before Ring cameras and such, but you all had a alarm system, and the alarm. We were all shopping in this mall, looking at different booths, and I think his phone rang, and it was the alarm company saying your door had opened, and he went home to your house to check on it. He called you shortly after that, because you stayed with us at the antique fair, and he called and told you that your house had been broken into, and they had stolen. I don't remember if he said they'd stolen anything else, but I remember he very pointedly told you that they had stolen your wedding jewelry. I was looking at your face. I'll never forget it. You turned, this is, cliche, but you turned ashen. You clearly were affected. He told you that they had stolen, and again, you had beautiful wedding jewelry. They were emeralds, earring and ring set, if I remember correctly. And you would wear it when we would go out to nice dinners and things. It was lovely. But he told you this, and I remember you started to cry, and and then he was saying that it was your fault because you had not latched the door properly or pushed it all the way shut or something to that effect. And it was your fault that they had broken in and stolen your jewelry and the jewelry he had scrimped and saved to buy. And then he said that, I don't think he used the word just kidding, but he said that no, nothing had been stolen. The door just blew open. But he wanted to teach you a lesson that, about, I don't know, you guys had
about making sure
house.
that, it was a quirky house, and you had to make sure that the front door was closed in just this way in order for it to really be securely shut and locked. And apparently that was my job.
Yeah, apparently you were the only one of the four of us who could possibly shut the front door. And he told you that, no, the door had just blown open.
Yeah.
But he wanted to teach you a lesson.
Yeah.
I gobsmacked, is that okay word here? That was one of the first times in my life that I had that disorienting feeling. Like, is this happening? Why is this happening? Who would do such a thing? He made you cry in front of your friends. I remember when he left to go, I remember my ex and I saying, it's probably nothing. It's a bright, sunny day. It's the middle of the day. You live on a busy-ish street. Probably no one kicked in your front door at noon on Saturday, And when he came in with this, oh, no, we were burgled, it was shocking. And, that they stole something that was very meaningful to you at the time, that he had imbued with a lot of meaning. And then to say, psych, I remember going home and saying to my ex, that's one of the most horrible things I think I've ever seen. And here's the shit of it. I didn't do anything about it. And I wish, in hindsight always, but the disgust I felt at that when he revealed it was just, quote unquote, to teach you a lesson about shutting doors, criminy. I expressed to my then partner when we got home, and she expressed the same sentiments that was just bizarre. Now here's somebody also leading a double life.
Right, exactly.
Well, let that go.
Yeah.
But we were both talked about, did we really see that? Did that go down like we think it went down? But to my shame and regret, we moved on.
Yeah, we all did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry about that.
Thank you, love. And you know that I need no apology from you, but
I know.
Thank you.
It also didn't have legs. You know what I mean? Like, we're talking about this incident all these years later, but it didn't have legs in the sense that, well, I forgave him. I'll just say it. I just moved right on.
Well, it's also nebulously hard to articulate, right? Like, when you try to explain to someone else what it's like to be in that kind of upside down dynamic, you feel crazy because it's inarticulable. And that's the point, because the manipulation is so subtle that the person can always look innocent. Like, if you object to it, you look like you're overreacting to something minor. So you just don't say anything. I didn't say anything. And the other thing is, it felt like an isolated incident for you guys. And even me, I didn't realize this was actually happening all the time. He was so subtle. He was so underground about it. And this is the frog boiled 1 degree at a time. And if you don't know this exists, you don't know to look for it. And you don't recognize it when it comes along. And I think
if you have not had plenty of psychos in your life,
Yeah.
you don't know that there are psychos out there. And I'm here to tell you, ladies, sit down, strap in.
There are some
psychos out there, and they're not all wearing a black stovepipe hat and twirling their mustache and tying young maidens to the railroad tracks.
Right.
It looks like
a lot more
that
subtle.
Story.
It looks like that story repeated.
Yeah, I feel like we should add here that this will have nothing. This, what we later found out doesn't matter. It's just, this is like horrible person behavior.
Right. It's that particular story doesn't really have anything to do with his sexuality.
As the resident gay person in this conversation, I feel like I should, comment for my people.
Yeah, that's just illustrative of his character as a person, not of his sexual orientation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's a moment to say too, because I know people, the question I had, like, how did you not wake up to this bullshit for 12 years? How did you put up with this for 12 years? And I think the answer is, again, as you mentioned, social conditioning, like as women, men often are too, but probably more consistently women, people pleasers, make it right, gloss it over, make it okay. Also, I must be the wrong one. Something must be wrong with me.
I didn't get the joke.
I didn't get the joke. I'm misinterpreting it somehow because I don't
want to be that angry lesbian yelling at man.
Thank you. Full permission to be the angry lesbian going forward, my dear.
Great. Line them up.
Line them up. I'll bring all my future suitors past you.
Absolutely. All your gentlemen callers, line them up right here. We're going to interview you.
So, but I think that the other thing too is, not to get too deep in the weeds here, but in my childhood, growing up, I, like many people probably listening, I had a father who was quite a character, and he was a rageaholic. And my sibling and I spent our childhoods running for cover. He was not physically abusive, but the psychological terror was intense when you're, a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, and you hear his boots on the stairs, right? And he comes up and it's very ominous. And I think I knew to like that. I understood. Well, I didn't even really understand that until I was an adult, but that rage was on the table. Do you know what I mean? Like, that rage was outspoken, and it primed me in certain ways. Like, I was looking for a man who would never rage at me. And I found in him, my ex-husband, this sort of preternatural calmness, that was like, I thought he was unruffleable.
Sociopath.
I'm glad you said it, not me. But that's the vibe, right? The crocodile that's waiting under the surface of the water, and you have no idea.
Who's parked in my driveway before I even get home from work.
Right.
Oh.
So that just gives people a little bit of background. Like, you are conditioned in some ways to tolerate this. You're conditioned actually to not recognize it.
Right.
And we just didn't, that just wasn't in our lexicon. So we didn't see it.
like I said, we just moved right on.
We moved right on. So let's move right on. So where are we going to go next? So I think we have to get to like the part where the wheels came off.
Okay.
Yeah. You were there for this. So I'm going to go super fast here through some of these details. This is not my proudest chapter of my life, I have to say. Like, I still carry some shame around this and still have to navigate those feelings. But I mean, even now it brings up a little bit of emotion in me. But we were 12 years into the marriage and I was in a play. And after 12 years in a marriage with a man who was demonstrably not sexually interested in me, and I was in a play and my co-star, this was finally the first play that I was helming as a lead, and my co-star was really hot.
Now, you were the lead in Ariadne.
Oh, that's true. Oh, you're right. Thank you. Okay, correction.
Now, I
correction.
Cast you.
You did cast me in that, and that was thank you. But the co-star, well, actually, it was my first romantic lead. Let's put it that way.
Right, yes.
So my co-star was like really very, very good. Not very bright, but very good looking.
Can we say a notorious bad boy as well?
Yes, he was the bad boy script to it, like coming off the page into my own romantic fantasy. That was it. The bad boy just walked into my life, and I sat upright and was like immediately bodily attracted, and immediately bodily just, what is this? And I had a therapist, one of many, later on say, Kristin, God will send a sledgehammer. And, in her Southern Baptist drawl, honey, God will send a sledgehammer. And,
that's one way to look at it.
Well, and nothing else got my attention. Like I was so in the mode of making excuses for him. And I was so in the mode of second guessing myself and doubting myself. And I didn't even see like I was bereft, and I was just really hollow emotionally. Other than my life in the theater and friends, my marital life at home was like bleeding a slow, it was like a slow bleed, right?
Yeah.
And then this guy walks into the rehearsal hall one night, and I'm just like, my whole body,
hot diggity.
I went on fire, and then I went, oh, I'm in trouble. And over the course of the rehearsals for that particular play, the sexual chemistry on and off the stage grew, and it came to a point where I wanted something to happen. But I was so wrapped around the axle wheel in terms of, I was, by this point, you don't know what up is and what down is, right? And all I saw immediately in front of my face was, this is something I've never experienced before. And so it ended in a culmination. So there's a night where I am at home with my husband, and we just had sex in the usual manner. And I turn over in bed, and we never snuggled or cuddled or any of that. Never, not an ounce. He snuggled a lot with the dogs, but never with his wife. But I remember I put my hand on his chest and kind of cheekily said, because I was feeling all very sexy in my life, I very cheekily said, tell me what you fantasize about. And he sat bolt upright, turned cold and vicious, and said, don't ask me that.
Oof.
And it was like, I shot up in bed and I just went, are you gay? And he said, why? And I said, if you're gay, you owe it to me to let me out of this marriage. And he said, do you want out of this marriage? And I said, if you're gay, yes. And he took a pause, and then he said, I'm not gay. And I had this feeling like the door had opened a little bit, like, my God, if you just say you are, we can be done. We can stop torturing each other. We can move. Maybe we can even be best friends and go shopping together. I don't know, but we can just, please, let's call it. And then he goes, I'm not gay. And
slam that door back
slam the door shut. And the thing is I was committed to my vows. Like, that was another thing that it was like, I it wasn't a religious thing for me. It was an integrity thing for me. I made a vow. And so I needed, unfortunately, it took me a long time to realize I get to set myself free. But until that point, I was needing him to just call it. And so that morning after he did that, I basically said to him very shortly after, because I knew something was going to happen with this actor. I wanted something to happen with this actor. And I'm trying to, and I couldn't see, in hindsight, I wish I would have had the self-awareness to just be like, all right, we're done. We're going to get a divorce and I'm going to go have fun. But I didn't have I couldn't see 2 feet in front of my face. Like thinking about divorce was so far down the road and so incomprehensible. I couldn't. And so I basically went to him the next morning. I remember sitting at the dining room table and said, I'm separating from you and I'm going to see other people and all that entails. And he goes, that's a deal breaker for me. So I know he understood my meaning. And I didn't respond. I think it was I warned you, you warned me. We'll see what happens. And I went and I had a 2-month relationship with this person, which taught me that heterosexual sex with someone who's actually interested in a woman's body is very different than sex with a gay man who is not interested in a woman's body and assiduously tries to avoid it. So it was life-giving and affirming in that way. And how do you tell people, I know at this point you can tell from your perspective, I was withdrawing from you guys because I was essentially doing this, I was being a Jezebel harlot.
Yeah, from our perspective, again, outside looking in, forgave anything weird we saw because life, I don't know, and thought you guys had a happy marriage and saw you starting to pull away. This dude had a reputation in the theater community.
Big time. Not a good one.
And I remember, conversations at home, and I hope she's not getting tangled up with, mess. Everybody gets mess in their life sometimes. Hope she's not getting tangled up in mess. At this time also, we began, looking back, it was the beginning of the full court press from your ex-husband on us.
Right. Yeah, let's talk about that.
When, he told me that you all had separated. You didn't. And I remember being kind of gobsmacked. Talk about in the car conversations. I was in his car. So he breaks this news to me that, basically you had runned off and that he was just brokenhearted, was wanting to work on it. And I was sitting there with my mouth open.
Because it was out of left field. You guys weren't expecting it at all. It was just so, because I had never said anything. No. I had not said a word to you guys yet about what was happening behind closed doors.
Yeah. And so, like I said, completely out of left field. We thought you were a happily married couple and all of a sudden, I don't think he said having an affair. He said it differently.
He didn't know at that point. We'll get to there.
But something about you were separating and going to do your own thing. I don't remember how we put it exactly, but I remember saying that with my mouth hanging open. And that was, like I said, the beginning of you starting to withdraw a bit from us and him beginning the full court press on us. I referenced earlier, there was a time, bear in mind, at this time, we all had full-time jobs.
Yes.
9 to 5 full-time jobs. His car would be in our driveway before either of us could get home, like on a Tuesday night.
Right.
And of course, we felt sorry for him, right? Again, looking back, it was really weird behavior.
Right. I would have been moved into the guest bedroom and would have just been essentially living a separate life right now. Yeah. He was monopolizing you.
Yeah.
He was monopolizing you guys. In my world, he was leaning on you for support, and I was letting him do it and pulling away from you guys because I felt guilty and ashamed of what I was doing. But he was also isolating me by monopolizing you guys. Just, he'd show up in your driveway right before you even before you'd even had your first cocktail after work, Angela.
I know,
That's
right?
that's offensive to God.
Horrifying.
Like
And
some people are like, don't talk to me before I've had coffee in the morning. You're that, and don't talk to me until I've had my cocktail after work.
right. I've been at school all day.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a martini. You
Right.
just give me a minute.
You just have to wait. Yeah.
When did you move out of the house? I remember
I moved right before I rented an apartment because I'd said to him, I need my head. He was doing a full court press with me too. Like there was a lot of manipulation. I remember, see, here's the thing that people have to understand is that the minute he thought he was going to lose me, he turned into a completely different person. He was all of a sudden bringing me. Again, I'm glad you said it, not me. He was bringing me cups of tea. He was touching me more. And at this point, I've got a lover, and I don't want him touching me. And
that ship sailed.
Right, that ship has sailed, and he's basically saying things like he's coming up to me in the middle of the night and saying, "I think we can save this, and I want to take care of you forever," and all of these sort of romantic things. And but it was, the weird thing about it was a personality switch on a dime. My head spun so fast, I didn't even know who this person was. And in his mind, it was, I'm tending to all of the things that she has complained about over the years, probably, is I'm guessing, but it was so clearly a manipulation that it didn't feel good. And I didn't realize it at the time because I'm saying, and now here's another way in which I was psyching myself out. I'm going, I've asked him to make these changes for 12 years. Now he's making these changes and now I don't like it. What's wrong with me that I don't like it? He's finally doing what I asked him to do all along, and it doesn't feel good. Well, it doesn't feel good because it's all a manipulation. It doesn't feel right because it wasn't genuine. It doesn't feel right because this man is essentially love bombing me because he's trying to hold on to his closet. So it's a form of psychological abuse, a continuation of everything that's already happened before. It just looks different on the outside. And so I was in a world of confusion. And so I'm running out at night. And I tried, here's the thing. I never told you guys I was seeing Sex on a Stick actor because I never wanted to put you in a position to have to lie for me. I never wanted you to have to cover for me. So I didn't say anything to you guys. And
looking back was very much appreciated because he was certainly becoming omnipresent in our home.
Right. So. And you would have had to cover for me. And I was just never going to ask you to do that. And then 2 months after that, I think it was at some point in January, it's kind of crazy. It was like the minute I had a relationship with this guy, I knew I would have to tell my ex-husband. I was going to disclose. It was almost like I wasn't cut out for that kind of running around. But we agreed to go to marital counseling. And the minute we were in marital counseling, I said to the actor guy, the bad boy, I said, we're stopping. I'm going into marital counseling. I got to go figure out my marriage. I got to go figure out what my husband and I are going to do. And that first night of marital counseling, I said to him, I've been with somebody else for the last 2 months. First night. And he stood up and said, you're a whore, and walked out of the counseling session, and then proceeded to call his whole family, my whole family, like in 24 hours, I think the entire block in the neighborhood.
I believe he also called your dentist or something.
My dentist. By the end of it all, my dentist knew, and I had to find a new dentist. But in his mind, for him, I had cheated on him, and I had broken our marriage vows. And that preceded a 4-month period of time where and at this point, I'm sure he called you guys and told you guys too. He was like, she's cheated on me, right? Did he do that?
Right.
Yeah.
I remember he was asking us for advice about how to get you back. He wanted advice. He got my ex to take him clothes shopping one day.
Yeah. He did come back with a better wardrobe. That's for sure. I got to say, you guys knew what you were doing. You helped him out a lot.
We did. He was like, okay, these cargo shorts got to go, baby. Let's J. Crew you. And, so we thought we were helping him because, again, we had no idea the big picture. And I certainly understand now Angela understands the reasons I don't think he used the word whore with us. Not then, later.
Later he used whore, yeah.
Later he used whore. He referred to you as the whore bitch from hell or something like that.
The whore bitch from... I need to make a t-shirt.
Yes.
I need a t-shirt. The whore
We need
bitch
a
from
t-shirt.
hell.
Hi, I'm the whore bitch from hell.
Yep.
Like it got by the end of our time dealing with him, it got off the rails.
Yeah. Because he was losing control. Like as this process went on, he was losing control.
He was losing control
of you guys too.
Of us too.
Yeah.
It was just it became like this is, and then you started by the end started to disclose to us what was really happening here behind the scenes, and it changed the lens completely.
Mm-hmm.
But do you recall the shame tour?
I do. I do. The Cersei Lannister walk of shame. Yeah, you should tell everybody what that experience. It was one of the most. Looking back, I'm embarrassed that I was ever a participant in this, but this is how psychologically cowed I was at the time, because I was carrying this shame. Well, I have to preface this by saying that the everywhere I turned, like literally, he told the neighbors that I'd had an affair. He told our financial planner that I'd had an affair.
Right,
all of our family, he was, it's like he put it in the Dunwoody Gazette. And so I couldn't turn around and not feel like I had a scarlet A carved into my chest. And so I didn't know if I wanted to. I was at this period of time where I was trying to figure out if I wanted to save. He'd said to me, "I want you to do everything you can to save this marriage." And I said, "I can't do that. All I can say is I will do everything I can to figure out if I want to save this marriage." This is how much I didn't understand the psychological dynamic at play. This is how much I didn't understand that I was in quicksand. My feet were in concrete in that relationship. It took, just as a little bit of context for the listeners, it took me 10 years to get my psychology right after this. 10 years of unpacking this, and the gift that keeps on giving. It took 10 years for me to really understand what this was. So that's why people don't leave. People talk about abusive relationships. Why doesn't the woman leave? Et cetera, et cetera. It is a mindfuck of epic proportions. It is so psychologically disorienting that it takes a long time to get your psychology right after this.
I'll tell you, lesson learned for me.
So
the shame tour.
The shame tour. Right. So he was doing this whole thing after the disclosure that I was the whore bitch from hell, I believe. I had to make amends. Like we were doing this whole thing where he had access to my telephone because I was the cheater. Right. He had access to my phone. He was monitoring me, all kinds of things like that. I had to rebuild. We went to a therapist that was like, we switched therapists. And then it was like, you have to rebuild trust with me. You have to make amends. He had all the leverage and I was absolutely cowed. And so by the time we show up for the Cersei Lannister walk of shame, I'll let you tell it from there.
No, he called us. And so we want to come over. We have something to. No, I think he said Kristin has something to share with you or tell you or something like that. And I remember we were looking at each other like, "Oh shit, what's this?" Because by this point we knew. In effect, not in effect, he got you to apologize to us,
right, for cheating on
him,
for
having an affair, quote unquote. And apologize to us as your friends that you weren't the person we thought you were.
It was so bizarre. It's so bizarre to even talk. Yeah, I had to go and apologize to you two for cheating on him. And apologize for essentially, I think he said something like, it would be understandable if you guys were disappointed that she's not who she presented herself to be or something like that. Like I had to apologize to you guys for deceiving you about the kind of person that I was, which is, of course, the irony there is so thick you could trip on it. And he had
I sat there with my mouth hanging open at the time and my partner at the time also. I couldn't understand what was happening. And it was truly a feeling of almost being underwater as you're sitting there thinking, what's this to do with me? At the time, we did not understand all the dynamics. We did not understand what was going on, but I knew damn good and well, like, you didn't need to apologize to me for anything. But, there you are earnestly apologizing, and he's there with that smug little look on his face. And it was, I don't know, it was weird. It was just weird. But it left me with this feeling of, I don't know another word, disequilibrium, underwater, confused, a state of confusion in my own mind as to what's happening right here in my own house.
Yeah. And that's the point, right? Like, the confusion, the more confused you were, the more confused I was. We couldn't compare notes and get our, get the ship righted in terms of what was real and not.
It was the most disorienting thing. Here's a lesson for anybody listening, playing along at home. When you are presented with a situation that leaves you in a complete fog, you suddenly don't know left from right and up from down. You have this disequilibrium feeling. Run away. Run the fuck away.
He had done something like that with me personally too, in that he took me to my apartment and essentially told me that I needed to tell him everywhere in the apartment that I'd had sex with the bad boy actor, and that he needed to know this information in order to heal. And
Gross.
I was like, okay. And I realized it wasn't about him knowing things in order to heal. It was about humiliating me. It was like each moment was like my humiliation.
And I don't know if you remember, but it was that day or very soon after that, he told us that he was ready to be a father. Yikes.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, I really believe that was a further part of the manipulation to trap me in the marriage, because before all the wheels had come off, we had sort of kind of started to talk about eventually having the conversation about whether or not we were going to start a family. Mm-hmm. And I'd always assumed that my biological clock would start ticking at some point, and it just sort of never did. So I kind of always said, I'm not ready. And he wasn't really pressing it, but it was really interesting, the timing of him coming to you and telling you that right after that moment of public shaming. It was part of the program that he was working to entrench me even further. I mean, what works better to entrench somebody in a relationship than a couple of kids? Nothing. Yeah. I feel like I dodged about 97 million bullets because I didn't have children with him. But, and I'll say one other thing and then we can move on. But, during this time too, part of his MO of love bombing was he decided to study up on female anatomy. And he decided to study up on women's pleasure, and then came to me and said, "You owe it to me to let me show you my passion for you. You owe it to me." So this was a 4-month period of time where I felt obligated to grant him access to my body to create his masterwork of heterosexuality. He had acquired some skills, but again, this was, now I was the one lying there revolted, right? Now I was the one feeling disgusted. And to fast forward, so we can move on a little bit, but there came a moment where I was I was like, every day I'd wake up and I'd be like, I need to figure it out. Do I want a divorce? Do I not want a divorce? And a friend of mine gave me wonderful advice. She said, you know what? When you pressure yourself, you can't figure it out. She said, just wake up every day and tell yourself, I don't have to decide today. It was very counterintuitive because it wasn't about avoiding the decision. It was about taking the pressure off yourself. And I will never forget, I was standing in my apartment one morning, and it just dropped into my lap. And it was literally like, oh, I want a divorce. It was just there, so simple. And it wasn't even a deciding, it was a knowing. It was like, frankly, it was like this thing I'd known for years. Like somewhere in my system, it was just a truth that was always there that needed to be surfaced. And it took all that bullshit in order to surface it.
Yeah.
And
To bubble
so,
up, I think, to the surface. Yeah.
yeah. And so the divorce was torture because he had to punish me for leaving. I was taking his closet door with him or with me.
Yeah.
And that was not nice of me to do.
It was,
You saw it all. Yeah.
it was awful. I mean, it involved the police. Like, in
It
what
did involve the
world?
police. Yeah. It
Like,
involved the police.
it didn't, just, he, he wouldn't give you your passport.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember we were talking to him, this is during the time when he was still monopolizing the daylights out of us. I remember we would say to him, "Honey Muffin, you can't do anything with her passport. Just give her her stuff."
Yeah.
And then he would sort of start to rage, and that was the beginning of us figuring out that this guy wasn't too tightly wrapped,
Right.
and that we had been taken for a ride. But yeah, it was a crazy divorce where I said you had to involve the police just to get your personal belongings.
Yeah.
Was insane.
Yeah. The one thing that was over all of this, or maybe underneath all of this, is the appropriate way to say that I sensed from him, and I know you sensed from him too, was this sort of dangerous sense of implied threat. For me, on my side, it looked like if you do not come back to me, if you do not stay in this marriage, it's not going to be good for you, which was borne out by the punishing divorce and
Right.
the way that he used that in such a brutal fashion to essentially punish me for not coming back to him. And he'd had the stick he was going to hold over me, right? The affair for the rest of our lives. He had all of that in place. But if I don't come back, it's not going to go well for me. And you experienced that too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't call it that at the time, but yeah, there was this undercurrent of, you better, you need to listen to me, rant.
Yeah.
It would start to have this edge to it. There's this man in your home becoming increasingly angry. And
because you're not complying.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to feel like, wait a minute, like, what's happening here?
Mm-hmm.
We've listened to this ad nauseum, but it started to have an edge of, you won't just listen anymore. You will agree. You will, I don't know, share my anger. I'm not quite sure exactly what he wanted.
Yeah.
We were supposed to hate you.
Well, it was control.
Yeah.
Of the situation. And he needed to control you in order to control me.
Right. And when he began to lose control of us, I don't remember his last words before I put him out of my house, but it was angry.
Mm-hmm. It was ugly.
It was mean.
Yeah. And the more he was losing control, there was a little bit of physicality there with me at one point, and I know with you, and also where we'll go next, which is, and we won't spend too long on this next chapter, but there was an 8-year interim between my divorce and where I was still just scratching my head, and I got on with my life, and I really swore off relationship. I had said to myself after that divorce, I was like, I'm never doing that again. And if it takes me 2 decades to figure out what that was, I went on a mission. I was like, I need to figure out what that was so that I can never do it again. So I didn't date. I mean, I experimented sexually because I had a lot that I wanted to learn and know, but I didn't let myself fall in love. And I was not prepared to be vulnerable until I knew what exactly had happened. And I left that marriage thinking that it was my fault that it ended. I left that marriage thinking that there was some fatal flaw in me that I had not yet uncovered. That was the reason that it all, like, that's how upside down I was in the reality of it. And it wasn't until in 2015, his second wife contacted me out of the blue. I was driving to my parents' house in Florida for Thanksgiving, and I get this message on Facebook that's like, you don't know me, but I married your husband after you, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk to me. And I just I'm driving, right? And I'm like, I pull off the side of the road and I read this thing and I'm just reeling and I'm going, do I call her? Do I not call her? What do I do? And I'm like, no, I'm not calling her. I get back on the road. Another message, Kristin, we're getting a divorce and he's gay. And I'm gagging. I'm driving down I-75 and I'm gagging, not because he's gay, but because in a one moment, I understood what that was. I understood what the brutality had been about, what the control and manipulation had been about, what the sexual abuse had been about. I understood what the psychological abuse had been about. And it all made such terrible and perfect sense in that moment. And I remembered this conversation that he and I had back in college, and his roommate, circling back to his roommate said to him at one point that he wanted to get married and have kids. And so my ex-husband, then fiance, was telling me, Matthew wants to get married and have kids. And I said to him, Matthew was out and dating George at school, right? Like we were sleeping in beds across, little stupid twin dorm room beds across from each other, right? All squeezed in. And I'm like, Matthew,
college days.
Yeah, I don't care for a repeat of that.
No.
But he was basically like, Matthew wants to get married and have kids. I'm like, Matthew can't get married and have Matthew. First of all, Matthew's with George. Like, what are you talking about? And he can't marry George. And my ex was like, no, that's not what I mean. And then I understood that he meant that Matthew wanted to go back in the closet to get married to a woman and have kids. And I got so incensed. I remembered saying to him, that's not okay. Matthew's not allowed to dupe some woman into marrying him just because he wants wife and kids. And then in my head, I said, that poor woman, she doesn't even know what's going to hit her. And then fast forward to the second ex-wife calling me or messaging me and telling me that. And I'm like, oh, he was never talking about Matthew. He was talking about himself. He wanted a wife and kids and family. And I was the woman who didn't know what was going to hit her. And so that whole thing was the moment that truth revealed. And let me tell you, I never felt rage like I felt in those, it's like on one hand, the disclosure from the second wife gave me the truth, which was absolutely imperative for me to understand. And also it tipped me into this place of rage, which I stayed in for a couple of years. And then I started a podcast. So I'm like, well, I better do something with this. Like, I can't sit here on this rage for another 5 years. This man has already taken too much of my life. But so, yeah, this is like, I know it's been a bit of a winding story to get here, but I feel like I have to take a second to cover my ass a little bit here, because I want to say, like, I realize we're making a lot of conjectures and assertions about my ex-husband's various states of mind and motivations at various points. And admittedly, I feel like I have to say that these are just our speculations based on what we witnessed, the behavior that we witnessed from him, and the way that we experienced his behavior. I mean, I know you're supposed to stay with your own experience and not try to ascribe certain motivations to the other person, because you never really know for sure, right? But going through this, I mean, I had been through such a psychological meat grinder that in order to make sense of my own experience, for a long time, I almost couldn't help myself but speculate on what could possibly motivate a person to behave this way. I was looking for answers. Otherwise, it's like incomprehensible, frankly. And yeah, at some point, you do have to say, I'll never know and be done. But it's just illustrative of how psychologically complex and fraught and difficult and tortured mixed orientation marriage can be, particularly when you're with someone who is so desperate to stay in the closet, who is in denial so deeply. And I do believe he didn't want to be gay. I don't know for sure because we've never had a debrief. He and I, there's no contact. But I said in one of the last podcasts I recorded, it's not okay for somebody else to make you doubt your reality because they're not ready to accept theirs.
Can we cross-stitch that and put it
We need it.
on
We
the
need a
wall?
sampler. Like,
perfect, because that is very true. I mean, again, we talked about the shame tour and how, and I'm sitting there doubting my reality of like, what is even happening here? And if you can do that to other people, I imagine what he did to his wife. He never told us he was gay. I didn't know it until you told me all those years later. That the wife the second wife had told her story of just horrible abuse.
Yeah, we compared, just for context of that, she and I then, became friendly, and we would meet for a while. They were still married. And so we'd have to go to neighborhoods outside of where they lived in my old house, in order to compare notes. And we'd sit and we'd talk about what their marriage was like. And in some ways, their marriage was even more psychosexually damaging than mine. He did come out to her, he did disclose to her, but he really did a number on her emotionally and psychological.
He drug her behind the car.
Yeah, because he really was looking for a beard at that point. He found her really fast too. Like, he was within a couple of months of our divorce, he was moving in with her, I believe, or she moved in with him. So it was one of those things where it was like, I gotta line up a new beard pretty quick. I don't want to dwell on this too much because I don't want to sound like I'm being a little bit schadenfreudistic, I guess.
I love that word.
It's a new one. You can borrow it. Yeah. But I do think it's germane to note that he cheated on his second wife with multiple men.
Yeah. Many, we found out later, many, many men.
Yeah. So not so concerned about it when the shoe was on the other foot for him.
No.
Hey, I want to share for your listeners a bit of advice.
Yeah, please do, because we're coming. I think we've hit the broad strokes. Yeah. Lest this be a 4-hour podcast of self-masturbatory storytelling on my part.
No, it's I'm glad you're telling your story. But the bit of advice, and no one ever wants to hear this advice, but I learned it from getting wet in your storm.
I know your core audience, that these are the people, I think your listeners they're the ones in the divorce, right? They're not the ones either well treated or not so well treated by their friends, picked or not picked, so to speak. But I want to give something to the friends and the family that, looking back, I knew you were my friend. I knew I should have picked you. But you try to be fair, right? You know how women are socialized, right? And you try to be so magnanimous and generous and blah, blah, blah. It was wrong. I made a mistake. And what I want to say to the friends and the family is, pick your friend. You know who she is. You know who that person is. And they need you. And that's a great time to step up and be there for them. And I know I failed in that, love, and I'm sorry.
You couldn't consent to being used in that way. I mean, we've talked about this before, but I was a beard and you were a tool.
Yeah, 100%.
And your empathy was being, what's the word I'm looking for? Your empathy was being co-opted and
weaponized.
And actually, yeah, your empathy was being weaponized, and you could not consent to that because you didn't know yet what or understand, as I didn't, what he was and what he was doing. Not
at all. But I did know in my heart of hearts that you were my friend. Mm-hmm. If somebody had said to me, who do you really want to go on a trip with? Which one of these? Who would you really want to? Who do you really wish was in your driveway when you came home from work every day? Mm-hmm. And if I could go back, if I could time travel and change something, that would be the biggest thing, to just say, hey, I wish you luck, buddy, but I I can't continue with this.
Yeah.
And
So for the friends and family of the straight spouses
yeah,
who might be listening, don't split the baby.
correct. Don't.
Don't, what is it, Switzerland? Don't try to be Switzerland.
Yeah, don't try to be Switzerland. Yeah.
Because your friend is watching. Looking back, I know you were. And it's another apology I owe you. I'm sorry. We thought we were doing the right thing, right? Being a friend to both of you, When looking back, the manipulative one was playing us really hard. And we weren't being a friend to you at all. And I'm sorry.
Well, apology accepted, but also not needed. And I've been doing this podcast for 7 years, and
Wow, it doesn't seem that long.
It doesn't matter what the secret is. It doesn't matter what someone is hiding. If they are intent upon hiding it and keeping it hidden, depending on what the stakes are for that person, I can only imagine, there are few points of empathy for whatever reason, however it went in there for him, whatever the calculus he made, the stakes were probably really high for him. And this is what he was willing to do in order to keep his closet intact. But then his manipulation style just happened to be so passive aggressive and subtle. And so I have learned, for me, I now really I really do understand. It took me a long time to really learn what it means to trust your gut. It's a pat phrase. It's a cliche. Trust your gut. Trust your instincts. We're not taught how to do that. We're not particularly women. We're not particularly taught how to do that.
We might be mean.
We don't know what it means. And when I look back, those red flags, my system was sending up alarm bells. My body was. In the beginning, when I go back and say, things just weren't quite right, there was always something a little bit off. And I made myself wrong for that. Oh, what's wrong with me? Because he's just such a great guy. I must be a bad person because I'm feeling a little bit off about it when he's just this really wonderful guy.
Right. He's wonderful. He's such a nice guy.
He's such a nice guy. He's never going to scream at me. He's never going to go atomic on me. And those warning signs were there. My system was working fine. I had just never been taught to understand what our evolutionarily hardwired threat detection systems are there for and how they work. And so I had to learn and taught myself over years, over that 10-year period, how to pay attention when my smoke signals are going up saying something is off here. Something is not right. I don't need to know what it is. I can just leave.
That part.
I don't have to know what's not right. I can just go, my body is telling me, my system is telling me something's off. Let's go. Don't care.
Don't care. Just go. I after the end of my relationship, my lovely note on the counter, after a few years, I got back into dating, and I started calling it the visceral no. Like, you're seeing somebody a few times, and I don't know, you go in their house and you have this visceral no. Like, something's off. Don't call us, we'll call you.
Right.
And what I found out more recently is there is a converse of that. There's the visceral yes. And I feel very fortunate to have discovered the visceral yes.
It makes me so thrilled for you and so happy you have found your visceral yes. I have not, but you have, and I
got very, very lucky.
I'm so profoundly ecstatic for you both.
Maybe for your listeners, who I know predominantly are people who are struggling with these same issues, right? Like, that's the audience that I see you. I get it. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happens. I wish, my side of the aisle, we need to do better. It's not okay to drag people into lies.
It's not okay to drag people into lies. Thank you, my dear, for being our lesbian champion.
My pleasure. I am the lucky recipient of amazing friendship.
Yeah.
So, and all these stories and more, because we got lots more that even that I remember. You wrote all that down, didn't you?
I did write all of
Good.
this down, and I have written a book, a memoir. And have I told you what the title is yet? I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. The book is called The Mercy Fake, the story of one fake marriage, lots of fake orgasms, and the search for what's real.
I love it.
So, and it's broadly speaking about sexual integrity. So it is about my ex-husband, but it's also about subsequent experiences where integrity either was or wasn't present in a sexual situation. And so broadly speaking, like it's what can go awry when we don't approach our partners with sexual integrity, and then what can go brilliantly right. And it's probably a moment to add, I did eventually fall in love again. And I have to say that, sadly, heartbreakingly, we are not together anymore. But when I did fall in love with this wonderful man, it was the most vulnerable and terrifying experience of my life. And it's not a rom-com, it's actually after trauma like this. And I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
After trauma like this, it feels like you're absolutely ripping your heart out to be able to be that open and vulnerable to another person in a relationship. And so this book goes through that experience as well, and just the rewards of that and how wonderful that is. And so yeah, I don't know when it's coming out. It won't be traditional publishing. I'm too lazy for that. So I will find a workaround. Some of this we're going to leave up to the fates. But for now, I know that there is a Facebook page for The Mercy Fake. If people want to go and like that, it'll be a sort of a watch this space here for any news about it. I'm also on Instagram, and I'll put that in the show notes. And I have a Substack where I haven't written anything yet. And I'm on, I have a YouTube channel with nothing on it. But these are all placeholders because I'm pretty bad at social media. So people can just sort of watch that and see what happens. So, well, I thank you for coming on today just to help me tell this story, because I didn't want to just sit there and blah all over a microphone to the audience. So hopefully this adds a little bit of color and context and gives people a sense of how
you got here.
Yeah, how I got here and how crazy it can get out there.
And how crazy it can get.
Yeah. Thank you, my dear friend.
It's been wonderful. Any chance to spend time with you.
Absolutely. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in today. Remember, the views of your host, yours truly, are not necessarily the views of Our Path or its board of directors. Please head on over to YouTube, like, subscribe, and comment on the videos you see there if you happen to listen to this podcast on YouTube. And remember, until next time, keep using your voice.